What's going on, guys? It's me again, your boy James Maba, and we are back in the YouTube channel. It's been about like 2 years since I produced anything. I'm gonna apologize in advance for the blue light covering my eyes. I got blue light glasses, and now I gotta figure out a way to film videos without getting blue in me. Anyway, so who am I? What do I do? In case you don't know me, so my name is James. I've been a broker for about 3 years. In those, coming up into 4. In those 4 years, we've done about 500 rental transactions and a couple $1 million in sales. So, although my business is primarily rentals, I do dabble in sales as well. But yeah, no, I mean, like, listen, this Fair Act thing is going to affect our industry and affect my job a lot. So this is just a quick rundown on what is it, how does it affect everybody, and how, like, what should we expect in the future. And I'm going to try to be as neutral as possible. Obviously, I'm a little bit skewed because I am a broker, but you know, I'll do my best. So we'll start with what is the Fair Act. So the Fair Act was a bill that was passed in November 13th that states that whoever hires the broker has to pay the broker fee. What does that mean for New Yorkers? So pretty much the typical standard process now, if you guys want to watch the old video on what the process is, you go to an apartment that's advertised, typically on StreetEasy or Zillow. You meet the broker there, he does his blah, 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 and then you pay the broker a broker fee for doing that, whatever he does. So that's the standard. Now, the person that hires the broker is actually the landlord. The landlord gives us an exclusive right to advertise or an exclusive right to rent an apartment, and they say, hey, go show the unit for me, find a good tenant for me, and get them to pay. The reason why we've been able to do this is just because that's the way the industry always has been. The supply and the demand it's kind of like been an industry standard. Nobody's questioned it, and everyone's just paid the fee. So with this new bill passing, it's now shifting the payment to the landlord. So just to be very clear, it does not 100% exterminate broker fees in general across the board, but it distinguishes who pays for who at what circumstance. So yeah, so in the exact language, just to reiterate, it says the law states that the person who hires the broker will have to pay the fee. That means that you can still technically hire a broker to show you apartments. You will just pay their fee, as opposed to the exclusive agent that's in the building representing the owner and that the landlord pays me. That's the clear ends, like that's just the very basic understanding of what the act stands for. Now, another question that I always get is, hey James, now that this is passed, isn't broker fees illegal now? Good question. No, not yet. So typically in New York City, after a bill passes, it takes 180 days until it becomes law. So because this passed in November, we have about 6 months of quote unquote normalcy until June 2025. That's when like these big changes start happening. The broker fees start getting paid by owners and yada, 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 yada. Now, in order to understand why this is a good or bad thing, you guys have to probably understand like what broker fees are, like what is the expense in general for somebody looking to find an apartment. So in a study done by StreetEasy, not much of a study, I mean, these guys have a monopoly on the whole market, so they kind of have like all the info in front of them. It states that typically on average a New Yorker when signing a lease is going to pay $13,000 up front. That is the across 3 boroughs average. I think the boroughs they did was Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, well, 5 boroughs. I don't know why I'm saying those boroughs. So anyway, point is, yeah, it's about $13,000 of upfront cost, and $13,000 isn't cheap. That's a down payment in some states on a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, or that's a used sports car. That's a Rolex. That's like something. That's a lot of money that people pay just to put a roof over their heads. So yeah, it is kind of an exorbitant like amount. Ooh, big word. It's kind of like a crazy amount that people have to pay in order to move. So it's always been an issue. Affordability in New York City have never been in the same sentence since the start of New York City. Now, and to break it down into like just a little bit, just how crazy and out of hand this gets, a big chunk of that $13,000 is the broker fee, typically 50%. Now, I did a little bit of James Maba research myself and found the average of, and we'll talk about just Manhattan. I found the average rent in Manhattan to be about $4,457. So, and that's the average across the board. Studios, 1 beds, 2 beds, 3 beds, whatever. The average is 4,457. So now in order to calculate a 15% broker fee, which is what a lot of brokers charge, you're looking at the monthly rent, which is $4,457, multiplied by 12, which is the amount of months in the lease, and then you multiply that by 15%. So if you do the math, you know, I'll give you time to do the math, do your thing. The math comes out to be about $8,000, $8,022 for a broker fee. It's kind of like crazy to think about that. Like, people are getting paid $8,000 to just open a door. Granted, that's what I do, but I just open a door better than most. Like, what do you want me to say? Yeah, so another good thing, like, now that, like, I'll just let that shock value just sit there. $8,000 for a broker fee is ridiculous. That can buy you cars too. Quick piece of advice just in the middle of this video: a way to avoid this fee is stop looking in hot markets. 99% of listings in like lesser known neighborhoods never charge a 15% broker fee. What I'm talking about as quote unquote hot markets is anything below 28th Street in Manhattan I'd consider hot. East Village gets destroyed with these broker fees. Chelsea, Nomad, Tribeca, Soho, you name it. If you're paying like a tax almost to live in these neighborhoods. It's ridiculous. Neighborhoods that typically avoid it is going to be Upper East Side. That's kind of been my bread and butter. I always recommend people, if you're looking for budget friendly, go Upper East Side, which I know is not very gossip girly, like what you think of when you think Upper East Side, but it's just raw square footage in Upper East Side. There's so much inventory. So yeah, piece of advice there. In terms of Brooklyn, you're dealing with Williamsburg. Stay away from Williamsburg. You won't pay 15%. That's kind of like my advice for you there. Now that we have an understanding of like the broker fee, how much it costs, and like what neighborhoods it's affecting, now we can start discussing like the long-term effects. Like, I'm not going to sit here and rant and rave about like why it's bad, why it's good. Like, I'm not here to answer that. Like, I don't know. Nobody knows. Everybody's just speculating. Brokers will say it's bad. Tenants will say it's good. What I do think is really, really good about it is just transparency. I think the transparency of broker fees, who's paying what are my upfront costs, are amazing. Sometimes you go to listings and brokers are like, there's no broker fee. Then you get there and they're like, psych, there is a broker fee. Bleh, and if you want it, you have to pay me. Bleh. And it's just like, dude, like, why didn't you tell me that up front? So I think this law is really good at creating a blanket statement that kind of covers all the bad brokers and the good brokers and makes them come up with ways to rent their apartments out in a way that makes sure that people aren't getting skamazed on these fees. So I think that's really good. Transparency and upfront costs is the most important thing, especially if coming out of state. Now, number two, what I think is really like a con of this is how brokers will kind of find loopholes around it. Some things that we've been talking about in the industry is, and keep in mind, the bill is pretty good at at making things bulletproof as to who pays what and who pays when. One thing that I found really interesting in the bill is that, according to it, the landlord pays the broker's expenses for listing. I mean, sheesh, I'm gonna be a millionaire. Just kidding. I mean, but it's huge. It's interesting how much the bill is going to scalp these landlords. And is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? You tell me. It's good for me, good for everyone, bad for everyone. Now, another thing that I want to bring up, which I think is more of what should happen or what they should focus on as opposed to broker fees. I think broker fees are an issue, yeah, 100%. But I think the main thing that we're trying to tackle here is affordability in New York City in the first place. Broker fees have been here since the end of time, and they'll find a way. They always find a way to get that fee back. Yeah, regardless, what I think is the most important thing is apartment/inventory transparency. So, I mean, if you look at like a simple diagram of supply and demand, you'll know that the higher the supply, the less the demand, and vice versa. And there's usually a sweet spot. One thing that's interesting is if you know somebody who has like a really crazy deal on an apartment and you ask them, how did you get that apartment? You'll see that they always are like, oh, my grandma's brother's friends, cousins, nephews, sisters, uncle had enough space available, or they heard in the building and we got this really good rent stabilized deal. Great, but like, what about the people that don't have the brothers, blah, 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 blah? You're just looking at StreetEasy. And now with something like this Fair Act coming into play, where landlords have to pay expenses, landlords have to pay broker fee, what's going to happen is they're going to give us brokers one listing to post on the market. That'll be the listing that they pay for, and they will pay for expenses, pay for the broker fee. And then in the back of our head, we'll have a bunch of pocket listings. This is a strategy that people have been mentioning. I don't know if it's going to happen exactly like this, but it's interesting to spitball the idea around. Now, let's assume that instead of 100 listings on the market, let's say 5 brokers typically have a control over the entire neighborhood. Like, it's tough for rental brokers out there. Like, there's like, I think 5% of rental agents that cover 100% of Manhattan. It's ridiculous. Everyone else is just bumbling around. So let's say I have a portfolio of 50 buildings and I know of 35 vacancies at this point, but I only post one on StreetEasy. Now, from this one StreetEasy listing, I have 35 apartments in mind, right? Now, let's say 100 people come to that one StreetEasy listing that's available on the market. That means only 36 people can find an apartment through me, right? So, okay, one person rents the apartment on StreetEasy and they don't pay the broker fee, they don't pay whatever. Great, amazing, it is what it is. Nice job.
Nice.
35 other people, I have 35 other apartments in mind. So what will happen is brokers will go through the 100 people that they got at the first open house and pick and choose the best candidates to show these off-market properties. Now, I know it's kind of like a stretch, but I do think that it creates almost some sort of like, how do I put it? Like kind of like an internal, like, it's not discrimination. I wouldn't say discrimination, but you're kind of like picking and choosing who you want to live in the building. Now, that creates a big issue because instead of the market being fair, and if an apartment's on the market, you go for it, you see it. Now there's kind of like a bouncer who's telling you, okay, out of these 100 people, I think these 35 people are really, really good and really, really qualified. Let me give them access to apartments that they wouldn't have had. And typically these people could have afforded the broker fee in the first place. What does that say about the other 65 people that missed out on the apartment? And like, it's the sad reality of the fact is that this act might create less inventory on the market, higher prices, and brokers can start picking and choosing who they're showing off-market inventory, leading to more affordability issues. That's my theory, because that's kind of like what people have been telling me, that they're going to start changing their strategy. Is it right? No. Is it good? No. But I think in the short term, really good thing is transparency on cost. I think that's awesome. We always needed that. And I think a lot of the bad brokers will get smoked in the beginning, but this might create some sort of discrimination, some sort of picking and choosing. And then they'll have to come up with another bill that, kind of cuts that out. And that's probably going to be something along the lines of, well, they can't even do that, but it's probably going to be something along the lines of like, you have to post every listing on the market within 2 weeks. They have something very similar with sales listings. You can't have an exclusive underneath for like, I think less than a week. So it's going to be interesting how it changes the rental market. But just to recap, I think transparency as a whole is really, really good. The Fair Act has really, really good, intent. I think that's really awesome. People knowing exactly what they're paying for, but we'll see how it happens in practice. So yeah, when you're out there, just make sure that you didn't accidentally hire a broker, and then make sure that everything is kosher. But just remember, this doesn't start until June. That's my thoughts on the Fair Act. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.